Hello, and welcome to Festival tomorrow. You've probably been here a while, potentially. Are you having a good day so far?
Yes.
Brilliant. So thank you for making a break from what's going on out there. We've got a record number of exhibitors this year, so there's just huge amounts out there. So thank you for coming in. Maybe you just wanted to sit down. But for whatever reason, thank you for coming in. And I recognise a few faces from our regular Science Cafe events as well. We're really privileged again to have Prof Dame Ottoline Leyser here, Chief Executive of UKRI, they've been massively supportive and have just committed to supporting the festival for another 3 years here in Swindon. So we're really grateful for that. And joined today, we have Ben McCarthy from the Nature Trust, whose full title, Head of Nature Conservation and Restoration Ecology. Is that right?
Yep.
So hopefully we'll find out what that means at some point. I'll leave space for questions at the end, but do feel free to kind of jump in as well if there's anything really burning. And we should have a roving mic somewhere in the room. Do you have a roving mic?
We do.
We now have a roving mic. There you go. I'll kind of kick off, but yeah, it's really, if you've been coming for years, the ethos really of the festival is really to say that what we want people to get out of it is to really think that they can explore what we know, what we don't know, what the big questions are, what the choices are, the technologies that are coming up, and then essentially realise that we have the power to help shape the future that we want. So really for this event, it's kind of, okay, so we know we need to be thinking about, green, whatever that means, and it's becoming used and talked about in all sorts of spheres. But what does it mean? Can we have an impact? And what are the kind of big players doing? Can we get involved? That's kind of wanted to get out of today. So I wanted to start with you, Ottoline. Really, so you've got, and it's not a strategy, I was corrected in our pre-call, but you have a strategic theme, building a greener future, which I stole for the name of this event.
Fantastic. That's called recycling. It's very good.
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, technically it's reusing because I didn't break it down into its constituent parts.
Good point. Really good point.
Reuse. Yeah. So anyway, so what does it mean? What is the strategic theme, and what does it mean for what UKRI does?
So UKRI is the UK's main research and innovation funder, in public sector research and innovation funder. And we are made up of 9 different councils. 2 are sector focused, so Research England puts money, block grants into English universities, working closely with the equivalents in the devolved nations. Innovate UK is very business focused. And then we have the 7 disciplinary research councils. This sounds like a preamble, but it's all very relevant. Medical Research Council, Natural Environment Research Council, Economic and Social Research Council, all of them, and doing fantastic work. Now, when you think about something like the degree of re-engineering we need in our economy to drive through the energy transition, but also to make sure we think in that really whole systems way about how we create a fully circular economy that is sustainable for the future and values our natural capital effectively. So many different things have to happen that we need to think in that fully joined up way. Now, UKRI is just a critical national asset in allowing us to do that. We invest about £800 million every year in projects across all of those 9 councils that are relevant to the re-engineering that needs to happen. And so the strategic themes, what they do inherently is look at that current investment portfolio, in the case of building a green future, £800 million of all kinds of diverse and exciting projects, and they ask, okay, what's missing? What are we not managing to do that is happening anyway in that kind of bottom-up way? How do we build the right partnerships to bring in everybody else into this national endeavour? And therefore, if we have actually a relatively small amount of additional money, it's millions of pounds, but on our global scale, a relatively small amount, where would we put it? And that's what the Building a Green Future theme does. It's asking questions about how we can accelerate the green economy, how can we build those cross-government partnerships and international partnerships to bring everybody we need to bring on board with this endeavour, and then a critical focus on what we call the last 20%, the really hard to decarbonise sectors where we really need some extra research and innovation to find solutions to the challenges in agriculture and construction and those kinds of industries. So that's the overall approach. It's about taking the opportunity from UKRI as a joined up part of the research and innovation system, really to think holistically about how to manage this transition in a way that benefits everyone. It's a huge challenge for the world to do this re-engineering, but it's also a huge opportunity to build the jobs and the economy of the future that will benefit everyone.
I mean, that's, pretty good overview. Can I challenge you on? Just so you've been in post for the last few years, seen a change in government, and a lot of people have been kind of, questioning some of the decisions made since the new government came in, a bit disappointed and that sort of thing. Do you feel like have things changed for you? Do you feel like you're getting the support, the right support you need from government to do what you think is necessary? How does that relationship work?
Yes, I think we are. I think there is a bigger challenge, which you'll have seen rising very rapidly up the agenda with the new government in the US, that a range of issues, and particularly the issues around climate change, have become politicised in a very particular way. We're living in incredibly challenging times globally. There's real anxiety amongst people about the rate of social change, the rate of technological change, challenges with resource limitation, and that creates a very fertile environment for polarisation. And those polarised debates are indicative that people don't feel listened to, and we need to create really high quality opportunities for people to speak and people to listen. That's important. But to do that, we need to make sure that the polarised debate, which is generally not very engaged and not very helpful in moving forward on these issues, doesn't kind of swallow up really critical issues like what we need to do to manage the energy transition effectively and fairly. So that's quite a key challenge for all of us, I think, to create a really positive arena for discussion so that everybody's concerns can be heard, and we really can take this agenda forward in a way that depolarises the debate, that takes it out of the sort of shouting rather than talking.
So I'm going to bring in Ben, actually. So, because a lot of this has been about what government can do and what government can lead, clearly in supporting what's already happening out there. So National Trust, this is just former employers of mine, really. So what I used to always quote a lot when I worked there, that National Trust is Europe's biggest conservation organisation, sort of known for its membership model around houses, but actually in terms of nature and landscape, National Trust sort of cares for quite a bit. So you just explain a bit about that. I mean, a lot of people might know, but actually we have a National Trust right here on our doorstep, and sometimes we don't know enough about it, I think.
Yeah, we're an extraordinary organisation, really. We're celebrating, we're 130 years young this year, celebrating our birthday, and we've just launched our new strategy for the next decade, which has kind of restoring nature kind of up front and centre. And we are an extraordinary organisation, really, in terms of the links into the kind of British psyche, and I think most people have some relationship with National Trust in one way or another. And there's lots of big numbers which don't really mean very much to most people. But yes, we are a big landowner. We own over 250,000 hectares, big chunks of some of the most kind of cherished landscapes across England, Wales and Northern Ireland, places like the Lake District and the Peak District and Eryri, Snowdonia and places like that. And we're facing into the same challenges, really, about what we can do as a membership organisation, as a major landowner, but also as an organisation which is kind of writ large into a kind of public dialogue around how we face into some of the challenges of kind of a nature and climate crisis.
Yeah, so you're looking at it from a different perspective because you're independent,
Yep.
But big landowner, lots of stakeholders, lots of people to deal with,
Yep.
and you're essentially, because you're a charity, your members have a say, and I remember the members have a lot of opinions, quite rightly. I've had, when I worked there, sometimes my picture was on the front of things like Laithwaite's wine offers and all sorts of random things, and I had someone write into me to complain. I was a photograph taking me outdoors, in an outdoor setting, but it had been cropped around me, and I got a complaint from a member that I wasn't wearing a suit, and I didn't look fresh shaven. So National Trust members will write in with opinions. I can assure you. But they do feel ownership is the point,
Yeah.
which is a good thing.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
can you explain what's in the new strategy that you've just unveiled, from the National Trust perspective, before we bring in how the public and your members can get involved?
Yeah, so I think one of the starting points is that in developing our new 10-year strategy, we spoke to a lot of people. We spoke to 70,000 people in drawing in ideas, not only from our membership, but from all sectors of society, from academics and science practitioners and politicians and local groups as well as our members and people like tenant farmers and other stakeholders like that. And we've got, as a result of that consultation and lots of hard work, we've come up with our new strategy, which is really has an ambition to restore nature up front and centre, a second kind of strategic goal around ending unequal access to nature, history and beauty. And the third one is around instigating action for the nature and climate crisis. And I think people with a longer view of the organisation than mine recognise this or see this maybe as kind of our fourth epoch. We started off saving the country houses, which we are famous for, and then we moved into an area where we're really focused on the coast and protecting some of our most kind of beautiful coastline, and that was kind of headlined with the Neptune Fund, which has been our most successful fundraising campaign and sees us now owning and protecting about 800 miles of the coastline. Then the third epoch was really around access and opening up our places and encouraging people to walk in and through the exhibits and the collections in those big houses. And now here we are in the fourth epoch, facing into this nature and climate crisis. And the biggest contribution we can make, most probably as a societal contribution, is delivery of our land. And that's really about nature benefits, this thing called natural capital, and securing kind of the public benefits and the ecosystem services and functions that ultimately underpin society. And so we're set on a very ambitious kind of pathway to deliver that for real, on the ground, transforming landscapes, bringing nature back, not only for its own inherent value, but the value to all of us on all different levels. So it's really exciting.
Yeah, I think it's kind of a full circle thing, really. The original National Trust founders, I mean, they were worried about people not having access to nature.
Yeah.
So it was about getting people who are working in factories all week some green space
Yep.
for their well-being. And almost the properties were collected accidentally because they came with the land that
Yep.
the National Trust wanted. And then the membership model and cars took off, really, and became a business model. So
Yep.
it feels like it's coming full round
Yep.
to the original purpose. So you mentioned ecosystem services, which we might come back to, because that sounds like an odd thing. But Ottoline, the National talks about restoring nature. What do you make of that? What does that mean?
I mean, it's actually a very interesting question, and I've just been outside with part of the UKRI exhibit on trees, and really interesting project, getting everybody involved in thinking about the treescape and their favourite trees and so on and so forth. Probably across the UK there is approximately no land that is not actually human influence quite radically. So there's no virgin forest, all of those things. So the idea of nature in the UK context in particular is a very human thing. And I think we need to be very honest about that and say what we want to provide are the things that people want, the things that are support people's well-being and so on and so forth. And there isn't some sort of special thing that is somehow definable as nature that we need to be working towards. And it is much more of a human-owned concept, and we need to embrace that and be happy about it rather than precious, I guess, about some narrow definition that is to do with not human. I worry about definitions of nature that are about not human, because I think that undermines the close interplay between people and the environment in which we work.
And in terms of declaring an interest, your science before you were Chief Executive UKRI was, well, can you explain what you, just briefly, just because this is kind of your area, nature, in a sense?
Sort of. My background is in plant developmental genetics. I've spent my research career trying to understand kind of how plants make internal investment decisions, how they allocate the resources between the roots and the shoots and across the shoots and all of those things. So it's about how they take in information about their environment, process that and make decisions about when to flower, when to branch, whether to expand the root system at the expense of the shoot system, all of those kinds of things.
All without spreadsheet in sight. Impressive. So, I mean, I guess what that kind of says is, so we talk about restoring nature. Nature Trust has the same issue with houses. So you get a property and you go, we want to restore this, but to how far back? When was the, when is the time for this house? Because it's been in various different owners and gone through all different, how far back can you get it realistically? And it kind of applies to nature, because what are you restoring it to, and for who and for what end? Is it for pollinators? Is it for species that you're rewilding, or is it for human benefit? Because there might be some places where that's a win-win, but in reality, a lot of the time it's optimized for something and something else gets a compromise. How does that work? Because restoring nature sounds lovely, but it's not as simple as that, is it?
No, you're quite right. It's infinitely kind of fascinating. So our focus really is kind of restoring into the future, recognising that...
Restoring into the future is a new phrase.
We're locked into environmental change. There's a kind of practical step about kind of resisting and then maybe adapting and then facilitating change. And there's a kind of interesting kind of practical conundrum if you're the site manager as to which phase you should be kind of leaning into. But just for transparency, we're partner of Treescapes and also involved in a NERC-funded research, which is looking at how will we measure our levels of success if we want to be restoring into the future? What gives us resilience, and why do we think resilience is important? And I think it's important because it ultimately provides benefit for us and the planetary system. And so we're really interested in the kind of practical business of talking to farmers and about how they should be managing the land and what restoration against a changing backdrop actually looks like. And without giving away too many kind of secrets before publication, our concept is around complexity, and we need to make things more complex, landscapes more complex than they currently are. And it's the complexity which gives resilience to these ongoing pressures and threats, but it's that complexity which actually drives these systems in providing the public benefit ultimately.
And you've got, I mean, it must be a lot of conflicts that arise. I mean, so one of the huge issues when we're looking at nature and nature restoration comes down to always be debated agriculture and food production. And you talked about farmers there. The Nature Trust has worked on projects, and other people have as well, with reintroduction of species, so for beavers and various others. And we see in this country an instance where those species being reintroduced, and before long we're giving licenses for people to shoot them to manage the numbers, and which doesn't feel really in the beaver's interest in terms of, thank you for my home, now I'm going to be shot. So how do you manage those conflicts? Because you're not islands of land surrounded by lots of other stakeholders.
Yeah, so I won't get too distracted by the beaver thing. I guess kind of as an ecologist, I'm interested in the population of beavers rather than the individual animals. It's the kind of the conservation of that population and how they interact with the kind of wider environment and this whole thing, and that being kind of ecosystem engineers and things like that. So beavers are great, and bring them back soon, I hope. But yeah, there's some land choices which need to be made, and we've got a lot of land, but most of it is up a hill and on a slope. It's not great for growing food. In fact, only about 20% of our estate is high quality agricultural land. And so we're looking at our estate and trying to work out what's the best land use choice to deliver public benefit, because that's our charitable purpose. And that shows us that our biggest contribution isn't food production, it's these kind of ecosystem services to lean into the kind of nature and climate crisis. So that sees us looking to establish 20,000 hectares of new woodland as part of our commitment to net zero by 2030. It sees us restoring our peatlands as our biggest carbon stores across especially the uplands. It sees us reintroducing beavers and other species because of the function that they bring to the landscapes that they're within. So yes, tough choices, and the real challenge, and something you picked up at the beginning, was how we do this transition from a kind of global system, but even in a UK kind of scale where we're living on more than the planetary kind of capabilities. We need to get back to one planet living, and that transition is hugely challenging on all levels, but the National Trust is really leading into that and trying to work out what our contribution can be to that debate, both in delivery, in research, as well as kind of convening more people to get involved in the conversation.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think that's great, and particularly think it's important in the face of the enormity of these challenges for everybody to do what they can do and not to feel endlessly guilty about the things they can't do. The more people do what they can do, the better. I'm very interested in the kind of complexity notion, which makes a lot of sense to me. But then, if you map that onto beavers, one of the things that quite often happens in conservation is a focus on a small number of iconic species. And I'm always concerned that that doesn't necessarily actually represent the best way to preserve the complexity. I had a powerful interaction with somebody from the RSPB quite some time ago who was the notion that actually all the work you do to preserve a particular bird might reduce biodiversity in general was something that was just completely alien to the way that particular person at that particular time was thinking. So I wonder how you managed to use a deep evidence base to understand how you support that resilient complexity in potential conflict to, I would like to preserve this iconic species.
So these are kind of choices to be made, and we're really keen to kind of make this a kind of instigate a public debate about some of these kind of choices because you have to decide one way or another. And I was listening to the Italian government official who was responsible for reintroducing wolves back into Italy. And his take-home message was, you reintroduce things because you want to. And that's a choice somebody along the line has made. And, there's that plays out with beavers in a UK context. But we're not only interested in those kind of feathered and furred things. So there's been some really interesting research done by forest research, where they're translocating soil and the fungi which lives within that soil into a whole range of other woodlands to see what the impact is of translocating fungi, which, extraordinary as the kingdom is, isn't particularly sexy or easy to get kind of good PR coverage. Closer to home, the National Trust, we're interested in translocating wood ants, for example, because we think but we don't yet know, so we're going to set up some research to look at the impact of reintroducing wood ants into otherwise depoverished woodland systems, to see how we can kickstart, and is it fungi or is it ants or beavers we should be chasing?
Exactly. Or nematodes.
Or nematodes.
Beetles.
Yeah,
or,
exactly. Exactly right.
Another powerful study was comparing the biodiversity in the sort of unmanaged land under a barbed wire fence versus a hedgerow, and you could easily argue that the barbed wire fence was more biodiverse than the hedgerow. And so then you have your question: what are you trying to optimise? That's fundamentally it, and it's an exciting question, and I think we need to. Not to get too precious about the answer, if you see what I mean. There isn't a pure answer. It's an answer that we decide, and we have to own those decisions, as you say.
Yeah.
So it's very human-centric?
We're part of nature.
And is that, part of nature, but the choice is when we optimise them, it's kind of for well-being and it's thing, but is it a human-centric thing, and are we just okay with that? As opposed to thinking it's not nature for nature's sake. You talk about ecosystem services, so kind of I know that goes beyond wildlife and that sort of sense of nature. What does ecosystem services mean? Could you explain that?
Yes. So if you imagine a woodland in your mind's eye and what function that woodland habitat provides, you might think of clean air, you might think of carbon storage, you might think of vegetation for herbivores, beetles, caterpillars to nibble at. You might think of the birds which live on those caterpillars and the sparrowhawk, and so you can start building this concept of this ecosystem delivering a whole series of different functions. And it's those functions that we're interested in and describe as kind of ecosystem services. And those services have value for us because we need to breathe clean air, we need a more climate stable environment to live in for our own sake, as well as the trees and the butterflies who live in the woods.
Yeah, I remember this, I don't know the stat, I don't know if you may well not have it to hand. Patrick Begg at the Trust used to always talk about the percentage of water that the water companies essentially collect that has been pre-filtered by National Trust land. And actually should we be charging the water companies for the pre-filtering that happens because the National Trust looks after its land the way it does.
And what's exciting is that that idea and this concept is catching on, and people are recognising it's actually more cost effective to manage the uplands differently if you can reduce flood risk to the town downstream to reduce insurance premiums. And there's a huge amount of work which is trying to create these kind of circular economies where the farmers who are managing the land more sensitively, such that the water's being held higher in the catchment, are benefiting from the reduced insurance premiums the town is paying for. And these kind of circular economies are increasingly important. But it also, both in a kind of ecological and economic way, but also it brings people closer to their landscapes and nature. If you know that the new wood on the hillside is reducing your flood risk, you're most probably going to be a closer kind of affiliation to that woodland because you recognise the direct benefit you're gaining from it. And trying to kind of bring this alive and kind of reconnect people and communities with their natural environment, I think is part of the pathway for this transition.
So I want to touch on the, get onto that kind of unequal access that you talked about. But I just wanted, just in case you wanted to talk about that, you talked about resilience as part of the strategic theme, which feels like it links to that whole idea of water catchments and ecosystem services. Is that an area that you kind of working closely, working on across the councils?
Absolutely, in a variety of contexts actually, and it is key and in the context of, for example, more extreme weather and so on, it's clearly a very important element, and actually also, the geopolitical instability that we're seeing. Another major driver for the energy transition now has got to be much more local, national capability in energy generation, and much less dependence on international supply. So I think there are a whole, as we've talked about, it's a whole system, and we need to think very intelligently about how we wire it up, and that brings quick benefits of the sort you've described, but also those very long-term benefits. And I think one of the challenges of this whole area is quite often those long-term benefits can be deprioritized in the face of short-term pressures and tensions. I mean, at the moment, obviously, we don't have very much money, public money in the UK to spend on all of these things. And so trying to invest in ways that support the long-term goals that we're after, but also drive those short-term benefits. I think those are particularly powerful interventions just at the moment.
On again to the next kind of area of conflict, I think, when I talk about unequal to access to nature. So it's a similar thing with museums. When you kind of think about how do you preserve and look after, conserve you have a priceless painting. The best way to look after that painting is to put it in a dark room and never turn the light on. But then no one sees it. And I think the same thing is true with nature. Actually, nature would be great if humans would just leave it alone a lot of the time. But you're talking about increasing access to that nature. So how does that work as, in terms of the conflict that arises?
Yeah, so there are some examples of kind of direct impacts from things like disturbance on some of our wildlife. But there's fixes to that, and we're on it with other agencies and public bodies to try to manage and mitigate those risks better. But the kind of bigger goal and kind of the bigger win is actually reconnecting people and not trying to separate them. I'm not interested in a painting that I can't see. So for the National Trust, we've got some kind of big structural challenges. Most of our places are out of town. Quite often you need a car. We constantly look at new innovative ways to kind of break down those barriers. It's quite difficult, you can imagine. So we're going to bring the National Trust to the people, is our ambition.
How do you
so
do that?
we're looking at working much more in towns and cities. We're especially interested in working with communities who are more impoverished from access to nature, history, beauty. And that's seen us do a couple of pilots with some big unitary authorities where we're bringing to the table our understanding of, for example, running a cafe and sharing that business acumen with the council such that we can turn their park cafe into a profitable business, because it's got to wash its own face because local government is stretched. We're working with government and statutory agencies and researchers looking at the benefits of bringing green and blue spaces into towns and cities in terms of improved health outcomes, in terms of more livable communities, towns and cities, shaded by urban trees to make living through some of our hotter summers more bearable. So a whole range of different kind of activities where we're trying to come to the people rather than expect them to come to us.
And I would, push back. I mean, on your framing, which loops back to what we were saying at the beginning, that your argument is that nature does better if we're not near it. Depends what you mean by nature. There's a very famous experiment at Rothamsted Research Station where there are plots of land that have been for 100 and something years under arable, undergrazing and untouched. The untouched one is some kind of scrubby, kind of woodlandy. I mean, it's not what we would think of as a lovely wood to walk in. It's not what we would think of as lovely nature, but that's actually what untouched look like across most of the UK. And there's nothing wrong with it. It might be wonderful, but this notion that that somehow or other, if we left everything alone, it would all be better for whom and under what circumstances. There are no absolutes in any of this, which is why, really thoughtful consideration of what we're actually trying to achieve for people now and in the medium and the longer term. It's a difficult problem and needs massive input from everybody to prioritise across those multiple timescales.
I consider myself corrected. No, I think so. And there's a lot of research funded by UKRI on the benefits to humans of you talked about reconnecting with nature, just spending time, even looking at a picture of nature has benefits. I mean, is that something that we're doing more research on, or is that something that you respond to explicitly in the work you're doing? How does that feed in?
We were involved with quite a large body of work led by Derby University, looking at the power of connecting with nature. And you're absolutely right, the evidence is really strong that there's lots of benefits, mental health, physical health, for example, of connecting with nature. One of the interesting questions for me is, do you get a better uptick if it's biodiverse nature, or is the kind of monotonous, kind of untouched parcel of land giving you the same value? And there's more research which is needed in that space. But the evidence about the benefits are really quite compelling. And so we've been running for about 6 years a big program of connecting people with nature and kind of trying to get people to stop and pause and think as they look at the vista, but also bringing blossom trees into central Birmingham along the bus route, because frankly just looking at blossoming cherry trees is beautiful, and that in itself is enriching.
And I just want to draw it slightly wider before, and I'll ask for questions from the audience. Because this is not all about we've done a lot of nature obviously but the green future is not just all nature, is it? And we talked about energy and all sorts of other kind of systems that we're looking at to kind of make it resilient, and there's the economy. How do we draw these things together and kind of make them fit? And then Nature Trust does a lot of energy too, but what are the broader things we should be thinking about?
I mean, it's a multi-dimensional challenge, and a lot of it is really to do with thinking hard about absolutely everything that you do and asking that kind of full life cycle question over multiple timescales. So obviously the Net Zero 2050 is a fantastic national priority to drive the energy transition, take away our reliance on fossil fuels. But if one did that in a way that was only focused on that goal, you could easily wind up replacing fossil fuels with energy sources that were themselves unsustainable. So they were, they're dependent on critical minerals, which are in limited supply, there's a whole variety of options. So we have to, everything that we do, we have to start thinking short, medium, long term, what the implications are, and all the processes, the new products that we make, we need to think about that full circularity. How do we ensure that that there is no waste, that everything goes round in the cycle? And that's a huge change, but it is challenging, but it's also very exciting, and it does create a vision for the economy of the future that I think is very compelling, and also provides real hope for people at a time when we're all feeling quite anxious about the future. So I think that vision is important for many reasons.
I'm going to go to questions from the audience, and I probably haven't given you enough time. We can go a few minutes over, and so have we got the microphone? There's a question at the front, and then I'll go to just down here.
Thanks. One of the things that's at the forefront, I think, of both of you is soil research and things like how you get soil health without livestock, how you get perennial crops and growing without inputs and those things like that. And I think that probably applies to both of you. So I'd be very interested to know how, if you're thinking about that, and also about the economic research. I'm very interested to hear how that applies to greener future. Thank you.
Gosh, that's a huge question. And absolutely how we need to change agriculture to fit in with the whole energy transition, circular economy, all of those things. It's a key priority. There are a whole variety of different strands to that. Absolutely low input, low till, all of those kinds of things, different kinds of rotations, this ongoing complexity question about intercropping and so on. Many strands to it, and absolutely, high on the list with evidence, generating the relevant evidence base, absolutely critical. And then that absolutely also wires into those wider economic questions. Even if one views that in the narrow context of agriculture, we're back to what is it that, how is value generated along the entire chain of on the farm, on the way to the supermarket, in the supermarket, and how do we ensure that value is distributed then appropriately amongst the various people who are involved in generating it. And these are big systems questions. And one of the things I've been very excited about actually across my time doing this role is I feel that people are stepping up to the challenge of these big system questions in a way that really only a few years ago people were less willing to do. That, that's a bit too tricky. What's the one thing? I was endlessly being asked, what's the one thing? And I used to say the one thing is to stop asking what's the one thing, because that fundamentally undermines the kinds of re-engineering that we need to do.
So in a practical sense, we've been doing all of those land management activities, low tillage, etc., for about 10 years. It's been part of our previous strategy. I think the interesting thing for me around soil science is how the new technologies are just ripping the lid off our understanding and insight into how soils work and drive kind of wider systems. It's really exciting and incredibly complicated, it seems.
Lovely metagenomics,
yeah.
things like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Question here with the green jacket.
Yeah. Right, I can see it's very, very complex, and there's more to it than just recycling. But if we could think about recycling of, I know what to do with my hard plastics in Swindon. What are we doing about soft plastics? Does anyone know?
Innovate UK question, maybe.
Possibly. I mean, you can recycle those in bigger recycling centres. I don't know what they do to them though.
In large supermarkets, but what happens to them then?
I do not know.
Aha.
There has been some controversy.
Does anybody else in the audience know?
Apparently, now whether it's still going, there is a company in South Marston, obviously just around the corner, who are using it to turn it back into a plastic oil, which can only be used for certain things, but it was better than nothing. Now, seeing the amount of plastic they're getting, I wonder how much they've scaled up that model.
So I think the truth is it's difficult and it hasn't been cracked. And Innovate UK does spend a lot of time and money looking at recycling and the circular economy, particularly with plastics. Single-use plastics is clearly high on the agenda. There's a company in Swindon that was doing this. and they found this way of turning plastic back into oil. The challenge they had was the amount of energy it took to do that meant that the carbon footprint of that plastic was higher than oil. So it's not a simple thing. So I think there's there's the old reduce, reuse, recycle still is the case.
Rethink. You have to put rethink on the front.
We've got to rethink first. And we
Yes.
talked about this, some fairly counterintuitive examples on this, isn't there? There's sort of, when you're talking about covering vegetables in plastic in supermarkets, sometimes it feels like a waste of plastic, but it saves so much energy compared to the food waste you lose if you don't cover them in plastic. Environmentally, it's better to cover them in single-use plastic, which is a difficult pill and a complicated question. I mean, this is a...
Yes, and of course, the other, I think that's absolutely right, and we need to be really evidence-driven and not do the thing that's intuitive if it's actually not supported by evidence. That's one really key element. The other is obviously replacing plastics with bio-sourced feedstock. So there are quite a lot of really good plastics now made out of plants, basically. So that probably ultimately solves that problem, both in terms of their biodegradability afterwards and in terms of the no need for fossil fuels in the first place to make them. And then I think, I'm still super impressed by the fact that adding 5p, then 10p to plastic bags has reduced plastic bag use by 83%. I mean, very simple things that have a massive impact. And everybody, can feel proud of the fact that they are having an impact by recycling their own bags. And I think that's really important. It's very easy to get overwhelmed by how terrible and difficult it is and not celebrate the successes.
I'd recommend, we'll go to the next question. I'd recommend there's come over here, go to the back of the atrium. There's a ICAS, so which part of Bath University, and they are specifically researching on sustainable plastics and bioplastics. They've got a centre in Swindon, and we do our monthly talks at their venue. But if you go and talk to them, they'll probably give you some in-depth answers and places to look to. Next question.
Yeah, on the subject of recycling, I do a bit of litter picking around the area, and plastic bottles and cans are phenomenal. You can just pick an entire bag full of them in about 10 minutes. Why are they not taken back to the supermarkets? I've been in Germany, and they have a scheme there where you take your bottles and your cans, you put them in the chute, and it gives you a voucher off your shopping for however many you put in the chute. Everyone would be out litter picking if we did that. I wouldn't have anything to pick up apart from Domino's pizza boxes. Why do we not have more?
But I think those kinds of essentially behavioural interventions are really important, and they're a really important part of the piece. And I think it's very easy to think, don't worry, science will save us, but it's not one thing, it's multiple different things, and we have to use all of the levers that are available.
We used to have deposits of glass bottles, though, didn't we?
We did.
Glass, absolutely,
Yeah.
Why did that go away?
Yeah.
Well,
I think for me there's something about just not getting overwhelmed by, this is not easy stuff to fix. There's no silver bullets out there. And, that thing where the plastic bottle cap is now attached to the bottle, so it's one bit of litter instead of, progress is being made. Of course it needs to be faster, but actually there's kind of action we can all be taking by putting it in the bin and not expecting other people to pick up our rubbish for us.
Another question.
I know we're late, so I'll be quick. Isn't the elephant in the room here that we are living in a society which we overconsume, and there are too many players making too much money from the fact that we buy too much, we waste too much, and yet we also don't spend enough on food. We should be spending more of our income on food, and we're not. And therefore, the value that should be going into the land to make sure the land functions well isn't doing that, and instead we're wasting too much and there isn't an end to it. I just think that there are bigger corporation level questions that perhaps need to be asked, and if we don't, then we're filling up a bucket with a hole in it.
Yeah,
It's not really a question,
yeah,
sorry.
I definitely don't have the answer. I think things are progressing in the right direction. There's these, net zero wasn't a thing when I started in my career. Now everybody's signed up to it, and lots of them are earnestly trying to get there. And there's a similar concept called Nature Positive, which is looking at your kind of whole life cycle analysis of your nature impact, and increasing numbers of organisations are signing up to that. You know, people are trying to get onto the right pathway. It's just these are really complicated societal choices, and we need to get that societal response to have the real effect, I guess.
And I would push that back to the concept of the circular economy, in that there's nothing wrong with consumption if it's part of a cycle, because it's not actually consumptive in that sense. So it's not that you can't have new things, it's just that those new things need to be made from old things rather than made from
More products.
more products.
So we have gone over, so thank you thank the panel, and thank you for you, because I think it is an area that is clearly complex, with complex answers. I'm not going to ask you for the one thing.
Good.
Do you have a final point? and then we can close.
Very good. Well, I mean, it's great to be here in a science festival or a festival of tomorrow talking about these really important things, and I think we need to, as I say, celebrate every win, and rather than wring our hands too much about the amount of work still to do, recognising that it's there. If one can create that positive path through the challenges we face, I think it'll be much easier for people to walk along it.
I'm really sorry, I've just got a really good story to tell, quickly. Mr. Crapper, who has Crapper, all the tip stuff and everything. So he is amazing, and his positiveness for the future. So in the next year or so, we're going to see greenhouses built on all those tips that are on the motorway, and they'll be using the methane to power, enable us to grow more vegetables and salad stuff. And I just think those are the little things we've got to be excited about and hope.
It's a great example of circular economy, essentially using waste from one to drive something else.
Sorry.
No,
Sorry,
it's.
I know you're over, but
I think it's a really good, tangible example of the part of the mix, isn't it? Final point.
I'll stick on that same theme of remaining hopeful and optimistic and taking action. Every pound you spend every day, you've got a choice of what you're going to spend it on, and you can spend your money in a less damaging way or a more damaging way. And so we've all got choices to make, but we should remain hopeful.
So just finally to say thank you all for being here and your questions. Thank you for people who are online, and a big thank you to our panel.
Thank you.